Do you enjoy robots as tall as houses? Do you already play Battletech in one of its many forms? Do you want to make your robot fights live in your mind and play out a story, rather than act out a simulation? Do you want to play out a large-scale game in an afternoon? Alpha Strike might be for you. Alpha Strike is what I like to call short-form Battletech, where the classic tabletop game is a much more granular experience full of many tables and rules. Alpha Strike tries to turn that into the abstract. The less time you spend having to calculate and reference tables, the more time you could play the game, and the more time you could tell a story. For some people, granularity is the point. There's nothing wrong with that. There are different ways to play games. That's part of what makes us tabletop gamers unique. Some people enjoy crafting the perfect battle mech lance that will crush all opposition. Some people like controlling every facet of their mechs. Some people like to use the increased detail of the classic system to drive the story, counting each headshot and ammo explosion as a major plot twist. And that is awesome, and part of what led me to fall in love with the classic game back in the 90s. But some of us do like the abstract, and like filling in the blanks. Alpha Strike can scratch a different itch. I can create a company of mercenaries and tell the story of them fighting for their survival when a contract goes bad. I can tell the story of a desperate planetary commander digging in and throwing everything he's got at the invading clans, including the kitchen sink. I can roll more dice, have more drinks, and spend less time on my feet, which, as a busy dad, I can't tell you how much I don't want to be standing around the game table for anything over an hour or two. So how do you start? What do you need? In my opinion, these are the absolute minimum purchases you need to make. The Alpha Strike Introductory Set. Alpha Strike, the Commander's Edition, either in PDF or printed form, though the printed form is hard to find sometimes. Either is fine, as you mainly only need to use it as a reference when you come upon something that is not covered in the Quick Start Alpha Strike rules. And lastly, Force Packs, if you want a specific mech. That's it. Though I do assume you have your own measuring tape, playing surface, etc. Editor M here, and I just wanted to throw in some more information on these things for the absolute newbie. You can absolutely just use some dice from a board game, or even an app on your phone. Regular 6-sided die work just fine. You can also use paper chits as tokens. As for a play surface, your dining room table will work just fine. Found objects, books, sticks, hopefully clean or sterilized, rocks, these all make just fine terrain for your first tabletop game board. For measurement, I suggest having some form of tape measure, but it doesn't have to be big or fancy. Most play surfaces are only 4 foot by 4 foot, so a small tape measure will reach across just fine. In a real pinch, you could use a simple 12-inch ruler if needed. Okay, Editor M out. Even those few purchases are not really required. I used to play with stand-up papercraft mechs from my old 4th edition Battletech introductory box. And you can download the introductory rules for free from Catalyst's main website. It is doable, though competitive events might have their own rules in place. However, I think for the best experience playing the game, you want to grab that introductory set at the very least. It's inexpensive, has a good number of plastic mechs in it for the money, and has basic but serviceable terrain included. It also has a number of handy aids that make playing the game much easier, such as a quick reference chart, a quick start rulebook, and tokens. Once you are certain that you like this form of the game, then you can start adding on. Some of the additional purchases that might come in handy might be more books. This is a luxury purchase in most cases and absolutely not needed, but books like Campaign Operations, the Alpha Strike Companion, technical readouts, and more might help you craft more interesting and varied games. Painting supplies. The miniatures come unpainted, mostly, with a few rare exceptions. Painting miniatures is a whole hobby unto itself, and there are dozens of channels that exist on this platform that make a whole career from painting them or instructing others how to do this. Give them a try. card sleeves, and dry erase markers. The kind of card sleeves you might put a collectible card in, these help to protect your Alpha Strike unit cards so that you can get more use out of them by using the dry erase markers with them. Wet erase markers are probably fine too. Both have a chance to permanently stain the card sleeve depending on the brand and surface finish, so test a small area of a card sleeve first before committing to putting all your cards in them. Terrain. There are tons of producers out there for Battletech scale terrain. If one is willing to sponsor me, I'll name drop them. Just kidding. The ones I've used in the past for other game systems are Death Ray Designs and Hextech Terrain by Gale Force 9. You could also just make some of your own. Game mats. Usually made of neoprene, like a computer mouse pad. Those are the ones I go for, as they are usually the most durable. They're not glossy, and feel nice to roll dice on, or put miniatures down on. There are many out there, but some of my favorites come from Frontline Gaming and PWOK, which are United States and United Kingdoms based companies respectively. A computer and printer. If you have these already, then even better. It can be helpful to print cards for mech variants that you don't already have, among other things. Definitely a nice to have but not needed type thing. I hear local libraries may let you print things there too, so worth a try if you don't want to drop the big money on a computer in this smartphone-centric day and age. I'm sure there are other things that one might purchase, but what I already described are some of the most common that I can think of. Once you have the basics, it's on to setting up a game. How do you do that? Well, first you pick a number of mechs and your opponent, such as a wife, kid, whatever, and then they do the same. How do you make sure it's roughly even though? Because you want to have an even game. Unbalanced games aren't quite as fun. Until later, that is. Each Alpha Strike card has a PV, or a point value, listed on the card. This is the basic value you can use to determine roughly how strong a particular mech is. For example, I have this Blackjack, specifically the BJ-3 variant. On its card, you can see the PV is 30. My Gunslinger, on the other hand, has a point value of 48. What that means is that a gunslinger is most likely going to pound the Blackjack into the dust in most situations. A lot of calculations go into this value. The Alpha Strike Companion has all the math used in those calculations, going off the unit's classic Battletech statistics. Another factor is the unit's skill, which determines how difficult it is for that unit to do stuff. The default skill value is 4. If you want a roughly balanced game, it could be as simple as leaving all skill values at their default of 4, and each person picking an agreed upon amount of points value in mechs. For example, a popular format sets the limit at around 300 to 400 PV, allowing for an entire company, about 12 mechs, to be fielded. For your first games, simply limiting yourself to 100 to 200 PV is probably plenty. So throw together an amount of mechs until the sum of the PV of those mechs is equal to or under the PV limit. This next section is dedicated to the more advanced way to make a force that is detailed in the full version of the rules. I will summarize it, and to see the full rules, you will need to have Alpha Strike Commander's Edition version of the rulebook. But here is a breakdown. Pick your point total. This is the same as I outlined above. Both players should agree to a points limit, and that may vary depending on the scenario you want to play, the era you want to choose, etc. I'll get into the era later. Right now, in fact. Step 2 is to pick an era. Battletech is a story that spans centuries. Technology can be different depending on the different era you have chosen to play in. The era is an extremely fluffy part of the list building. That is to say that there is a lore-related reason this step exists. This limits the mech variants that are available to choose from. I recommend reviewing this webpage, the Master Unit List, a free resource for Battletech to make your choice. Link in the description below. Step 3. Pick a faction. Once you have picked an era, you now can pick one of the major players in that time to represent. This is another fluffy part of the process, as it further limits what mechs and variants might be available to certain organizations. For example, the clans would probably rather be caught dead than use inner sphere technology in most cases. Exceptions always exist, though. Although I always pick a faction and determine the broad strokes of the technology base available to my units, the availability of a particular mech or vehicle doesn't always play a large part in my force building process, as long as I can narratively explain where my unit got their hands on one. And no, it just fell off the truck is never a good excuse. Again, organized events probably have their own rules and restrictions regarding this, so as a general rule, do read any documentation provided to you by the event organizer if you plan on attending. Step 4. Build a formation. This is probably the one I see most folks get stuck on. I didn't know what the formations were or how to use them when I first started with Alpha Strike. I came from an era of classic Battletech that predated some of these terms, even if I already had generally used the basic tenets underlying the system. To break it down, a formation is a grouping of units, usually mechs, that generally align in their purpose on the battlefield. For a list of these formations, the Commander's Edition, page 116 of my 2019 printed edition, starts the list. You can find another table detailing the organization of each formation in that section, detailing how many units are allowed in each formation depending on the faction. For example, a Lance is 4 mechs, where a clan Star is usually 5. Then, each mech is assigned a role that they are intended to fill, and you can find it on the Alpha Strike card. For example, my Blackjack BJ-3 is listed as a Brawler intended for frontline combat. Conversely, the Gunslinger is instead listed as a Juggernaut, intended to draw lots of incoming fire, anchor a battle line, etc. When you are putting your mechs into formations, each formation type explains what the requirements are for making a formation. So if you wanted to make a Striker-Cavalry Lance, consisting of fast movers that use hit and fade tactics, the requirements detail that all units in the formation must have a minimum ground movement value of 10 inches or a jumping movement value of at least 8 inches. It also says no units may be an assault class unit, size 4 or above. The size is also listed on the Alpha Strike card. There is a loophole, however. Some formations list an ideal role in their description. What this means is that if all the units in the formation share this role, then all the other restrictions can be ignored. I don't know if a Striker exists that is size 4 or that moves slower than 10 inches ground and 8 inches jumping, but if there is, you can include it as long as every other unit is also a Striker role. If you know of one, tell me in the comments so I can make an entire lance of them. Why do you want to use formations? Well, because formations that adhere to these restrictions get a special bonus. In our Striker/Cavalry Lance example, 75% of the units, that would be 3 out of the 4 for a normal lance, get to use a special pilot ability, also known as SPAs. These can modify how the unit works, and in our example, Speed Demon is the pilot ability granted, allowing each unit has the ability to push an additional 2 inches of movement out of their unit. Pretty great for a unit that wants to hit and run. Step 5. Select skill ratings. Once you have organized the units into formations, you can then mess with the skill ratings for each unit. This has an effect on the PV of each unit, as a better pilot in a great mech might make a bigger difference than if that same pilot got stuck in a subpar machine. I suggest using the master unit list to calculate this for you. For the mathematically inclined, there is a table somewhere in the Commander's Edition that lets you do the math yourself. Don't ask me where it is. I never use it, but I remember it being in the front of the book in the introduction somewhere, along with the different labels associated with different levels of skill. I do know that green would be skill 5, a veteran would be skill 4, and so on, because lower is better. This part can help you fine-tune your force to hit that points limit, as you can make big changes by changing the skill ratings of units. Changing a basic Devastator skill from 4 to 1, because lower is better, can make the PV jump from 45 all the way to 72 for this mech alone. You can also reduce the cost of some of your units by giving them a pilot with Dog Water ranked skill. Higher skill ratings than 4 actually discount the base price, so if you just have to shove that Highlander into your force, you might consider going with a lower skilled pilot somewhere. Step 6. Choose some special pilot abilities. As I described earlier, special pilot abilities can be added to a pilot that change how a unit operates in some way. Some changes are bigger than others, and outside formations, if you want a special pilot ability, this is how you get them. The Commander's Edition book lists the restriction of 1 SPA per 12 units to start with. They also mention in the Special Pilot's Ability section that you really should aim to not give more than 1 in 4 units an SPA. I'm not sure which one's really the accepted standard, but again, review any documents provided by an organizer before attending an event for clarification on this. I generally find that less is better so the game doesn't get too weighed down with special case rules that you need to remember. Both the total number of different abilities as well as the maximum PV value of those abilities are determined by the skill rating of the unit. Skill ratings of 5+ don't get access to any, as they are too green of pilots to get a special skill. Regular pilots of skill 4 get access to 1 ability worth 2 PV or less. Veteran and Elite, skill 3 and 2 units, both get 2 abilities with a combined PV total of 4 or less. The truly heroic or legendary pilots get 3 skills, but they must have a PV sum of 6 or less. Step 7. Select a special command ability, if applicable, and the officers of your force. In some publications, like a field manual or a force guide, you may find some special command abilities that affect all the units in the force. If you know what special command rules your chosen faction uses, then use that. Otherwise, the Alpha Strike Commander's Edition can set you in the right direction. The average skill rating determines the number of points you can spend on SCAs, found on page 102 of my printing. After selecting an SCA, you must also determine which units in your force will be the officers. A maximum of 1 officer every 6 total units in the force. One of these officers must be designated as your senior commanding officer. In games, bad things happen if that commander gets headhunted, so choose wisely. If this commander and all the other officers in the force get removed from the battlefield, you also lose access to any special command abilities your force has, if any. And there you have it. 1 Alpha Strike ready force, all set up for battle. Now that you have a force, what do? You play games, of course. You could just go for a regular no-holds-barred brawl with your opponent, but in my experience, that doesn't create a compelling story. The games I tell my friends about are the ones where something special happened, where the combat was asymmetrical and I came out on top, or where the stakes were high. If you have the Alpha Strike Commander's Edition, take a look through the Scenarios section. Here they list a couple of starter scenarios to get you on the right path, with some classics like King of the Hill or Capture the Flag, meant to represent a number of military operations that might occur. Things like holding a key defensive point, or capturing a valuable bit of technology or intel. When I was playing through my Polaris security campaign, I used these starter scenarios as a guide, coming up with great narrative reasons why my force would be participating in these battles. The scenarios listed there have even more variations that can make the games more lively. Give them a try. If you have played out these scenarios, then Catalyst Game Labs offers some free products that might interest you. My favorite so far has been Chaos Campaigns, a system linking scenarios together narratively. Check out their downloads page and see if anything piques your interest. One thing I highly recommend, after laying down a couple of beatdowns, on the table of course, please don't actually beat your opponents, try implementing some of the optional rules. They can drastically change the game experience. Battlefield intelligence, concealing unit data, dropping troops, minefields, and more all make for some extremely unique gaming experiences. Sometimes this even means that mechs that are garbage in a straight-up fight get their chance to shine. As a former ground pounder myself, I enjoy adding infantry and artillery to my games. There are many products available to add some variety and flavor to your games if you so desire. Of course, another step you might take is picking up the Campaign Operations book, which has some great rules for managing a force through multiple operations and linking even more scenarios into campaigns. Aside from this, visit events, talk with others about the game. Remember that tabletop games are meant to be social. Good manners and hygiene go a long way towards being accepted into regular games at the club. I feel compelled to also remind folks that Battletech is for everybody, with a caveat. This means everybody who can be kind. We don't discriminate based on gender, chosen or otherwise, race, sexuality, etc. If you are the kind of person that has a problem accepting that people outside of your experience exist, then there's the door. Stick to video games. We don't want or need that kind of hate here. Feel free to talk about this in the comments, but know that I will be watching. If I catch anybody out of line, they'll receive a ban with more fury than a Tarian naval officer receiving word of a lost ground offensive. There is a ton more that I could cover on this topic, but I'll save it for other videos. If you have any specific questions, drop me a comment and I'll do my best to answer them. If you want to see my campaign play out with my mercenary unit, the Polaris Security Solutions, stick around and you should see a link to the video at the end of this one. If you stuck around this far, I appreciate you. And if you could, please do all the algorithm make happy things to help me out. This has been M, and as always, the battle will continue.